Okay. Hello, everyone. How are you? We are here with Chris Bonnello, the author of the book Underdogs. And we'll be doing, I think, chapter 14 and 15 today. Can we do chapter 16 as well, Chris?
Oh, let's take a look. I thought I'd already read chapter 14.
Oh, maybe
Yes, I
we
have.
did.
That's one that ends with Mark leading everyone out of Spitfire's Rise,
We
unauthorized.
did. Yes.
Yeah.
Did we do chapter 15 as well? Because I have marked chapter 16 here.
Yes, we did, because the last line was just like that, Kate was missing.
Yes, I am here at chapter 16. All right. So can we do a quick recap of all those chapters?
Yeah.
And then
14,
we
15, and 16
yes.
from last time. Yeah, it was a big
We
one.
didn't do 16. I don't think we did 16. We have to do
Oh, 13, 14, and 15, yes.
yes.
So, yeah, so we started off with the strike team, Ewan, Kate, Jack, and Charlie, breaking into New London's inner city prison because it was the only way to escape Oliver Roth chasing them with a laser cannon. And they basically ran around the inner city prison getting chased by podcopters, like miniature helicopters and laser cannons and all these horrible things. And lots of people around them were dying, but they found a family to shelter them. That's the shortest description I can really use to summarize the events, but it was rather intense.
It was.
And then chapter 14, that one was from Raj's perspective. And yeah, Simon comes back from comms with a note to the others saying, okay, we've lost contact with the underdogs, including Alex as well. Alex is probably dead. We don't know about the other four. Um, that's it. And so they interpret that as, well, okay, I guess the war's pretty much lost now. If we've lost our best fighters, then what else is there to lose? So Mark, being Mark, united by differences, roughly, uh, he decides, you know what? Yeah, let's go to Lieutenant Lambourne's headquarters to see what the whole thing was about in the first place, because that was the place where which was on Keith Tyler's map, where apparently Keith Tyler was taking Shannon. So he's taken Raj, Simon, and Gracie, largely against their will, has to be said, to investigate what this is all about. Because, well, what else is there to fight for? They're probably going to die trying to find out, but well, they've already lost. And chapter 15 was back in New London's inner city prison, where Ewan kind of makes friends with the family that's sheltering them. That is Patrick and Ruth, two parents in their 50s, and two adult sons, Aidan and Benjamin. And the very last thing that happened was Ewan looking over to the exit to find that Kate has vanished. And that's it, basically. Oh yeah, and they have this enormous minigun as well that they managed to pull off a destroyed podcopter in order to defend themselves, and they're keeping that with them as well.
I remember last time when we ended on chapter 14, I was like, can we do a third chapter? And then we did the third chapter, and the last sentence was, and just like that, Kate was missing. And I was like, shoot, what?
Great place to end, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a weird place to end. So I'm looking forward to this chapter. So let's go ahead and start.
Okay. Chapter 16. McCormick had lost soldiers before, over 20 of them, but the pain never dulled. He wouldn't let it dull, because each of their lives was worth mourning. It would be a huge betrayal of the deceased if he ever acclimatized to the pain of losing someone. That made it all the more painful to lose 5 at once. The Boys' Brigade attic felt isolating at the best of times, even when he had company. The hall may have had a long history of hosting joyful children, not least Simon Young, but that history was far away. Simon had not returned from Spitfire's Rise. The logical McCormick knew the lad hadn't had time to get there and back, but the human McCormick, the McCormick who had just lost people he loved, was afraid that something awful had happened to Simon too. The phone rang. It had been all McCormick had wanted, but the last thing he had expected. At least one of the strike team was still alive. Wait, that's number ending in 202. That same phone had called me right after they broke in. Is that really? McCormick answered the phone. After a few minutes of brief flicking images, the video focused. It showed a man's feet staggering around on a carpeted floor. Hello? McCormick asked, to no response. The phone was dumped onto a kitchen worktop, fixing the camera's view to the ceiling. The light fixtures revealed that Alex was in somebody's house, far away from the citadel. Bandages, came his deep, distinct groan. Come on, come on. Alex! McCormick barked. Clatter sounded across the kitchen floor from objects thrown around in frustration. They won't have bandages, McCormick thought. They'll have 2-inch plasters and a cute pair of miniature scissors. Plasters means band-aids, by the way. Good for a 5-year-old's grazed knees, but not for gunshot wounds. Alex, are you okay? Kate said you were shot in the shot. Not beaten yet, Alex yelled to her surroundings. You must have had some clothes. The image went blurry again as Alex grabbed the phone and dashed up the stairs. It stabilized again moments later as he took a moment to balance it vertically on a bedside table. McCormick finally saw his friend on screen, staggering to a wardrobe at the back of the room. There was a hole in the back of his combat gear and a large pool of blood coagulating around his back. The force of his arm almost ripped the cupboard door from its hinges, but only on the third time he reached for it. His coordination must have dripped away with his blood. McCormick was overcome with a sense of powerlessness. Alex was visible, audible, but unreachable. He could die on screen with McCormick miles away in a dark attic. Alex sat down on the bed with an armful of clothes, finally fleecing the phone, and removed his shirt. He winced in obvious pain as it slid over both sides of the bullet wound, and started to wrap a long-sleeved shirt around his neck and armpit. Hi, sir, his voice gasped through the phone speakers. Are you okay? McCormick asked, his voice wobbling. Talk to me. I'm alive, said Alex. Somehow. Got out and hiding in the next village. I've lost some quite a lot. Slow down, Alex. Nice, relaxed breaths. Now, you take nice, relaxed breaths, you old fart. I'm the one who needs blood. It's the one thing you can't scavenge in the countryside. Even through a phone screen, McCormick could tell that the knot in the makeshift bandage was an ugly one, but it held. Alex reached for shirt number 2 and repeated the process, clenching his teeth as he compacted his wound tighter. McCormick felt a weight in his stomach, feeling the pain of his friend from miles away. You sound surprised to hear from me, Alex moaned. Yes, Kate told me you were cornered and unarmed. I was trapped in the clone factory control room. Thankfully, I'd already killed 3 clones on my way in. Their leftover weapons held more than enough bullets. I killed a few guards at the floor Z exit, and a few more at the water. Ah! He seemed to struggle with the second knot far more than the first. Alex? Yeah, I'm fine. Alex, McCormick boomed, loud enough to worry about being heard outside the comms unit. I need you to be honest. No comic exaggeration now. How are you really holding out? Ugh, weaker than strawberry wine. But I'll be okay if I stay awake. I've got water. These guys have some bowl stuff left in the fridge. So, what happened to the others? McCormick couldn't find the words. His silence was enough of an answer. Ah, crap. I haven't heard from them in an hour, McCormick said with a sigh. They were trying to reach the exit. So they could be alive, right? Let's talk about getting you home. Well, that's a pretty bloody clear answer. And that must be more than 3 minutes already. Call you back. The screen went blank, and McCormick was alone in the world again. Silence took over. Don't forget, they have a time limit of 3 minutes before their phones can start to be tracked, so that's why Alex has hung up. Simon had still not returned, and all the worst possibilities were creeping into McCormick's mind. Keep the tears away. Alex says he's calling back. It took several lonely minutes, but Alex did call again. When he did, he was lying down on the bed. Get up, Alex, said McCormick. If you fall asleep, you're not waking up again. By all rights, I should be dead already, the figure on the bed mumbled. I only got out because the others were pinned down. 5 bullets left now. What's the point in a telescopic handgun if you've only got 5 bullets? Alex, for once in your life, just bloody listen to me. Get up. I think there are arteries in our shoulders, Alex continued slowly, as if drunk, but the bullet must have missed them. Ewan says there's no such thing as luck. Raj says the big guy answers his prayers. And I've gone through my life thinking that sometimes crap just happens. I don't know which one of us is right anymore. We'll talk about it at home, said McCormick. Don't give up. You made it this far. Alex laughed his way into a cough. Me give up? You never met my dad. Well, my trainer. I was never allowed to call him dad in the dojang. I can hear his bloody voice now, barking the same stuff about fighting through the pain. I was raised on a diet of martial arts and shouting. There's a massive black guy probably somewhere rolling the roost in New Brighton right now, but in a way, he's still here with me. Everywhere I go, wherever I go, the moral of every story is still don't lose. Dean Giannelli, my father, but mainly my taekwondo coach. Are you talking about him to keep yourself awake, or is this your vulnerability finally coming out? The vulnerability in Alex had always been there, and McCormick had always recognised it. The man had disguised it well. He had talked about his childhood years as the only black kid my side of Brighton, like it was a badge of honour rather than a source of isolation, and claimed that his lone wolf approach to missions was due to his own skill rather than any difficulty with teamwork. He expressed pride in being one of the last surviving normal underdogs, knowing how much it irritated the Oakenfold teams, but McCormick knew it was just to disguise how isolated he felt. It must have been a taste of what the students had felt in the old days, but in reverse. But even without them, Alex would have disguised his vulnerabilities all the same. McCormick could see their root cause clear as daylight, an upbringing of not being allowed to show weakness. Dad used to tell me that people who give up don't have souls, Alex finished, so I've never given up. Do you believe in souls? I believe in people, answered McCormick evasively. Especially you. Especially you. Now let's get you home. Stuff that, said Alex, dragging himself up from the bed and out of view of the phone's camera. He seemed to be heading for a window. If they get within half a mile of the exit, I'll be in radio range. I'm staying put and keeping an ear out. McCormick saw no reason to argue. Alex's strategy was unlikely to work, but there was no point in trying to convince him. Well, either way, McCormick answered. Make yourself secure there. I'll send Simon and Gracie with food and medical supplies. They'll be home in 2 days. Silent Simon and Lazy Gracie? Oh, my two bestest friends. Have you run out of cool kids at home? Wrong joke, wrong moment. Going by Alex's sudden silence, McCormick knew he instantly regretted his words. Alex walked back into camera shot and returned to the bed, patting a hand against the sticky, dampening clothes around his shoulder. You don't need to send anyone, he finished. There's enough here to keep me going. Just don't expect me to come home. You'll live, Alex. Make yourself believe it. Oh, you got that bit right, said Alex with his hand approaching the phone, his second set of 3 minutes almost over. I'm definitely going to live, but I'm not coming home. Not without the kids. And paragraph break.
I'm so glad Alex is alive, though.
I'm glad.
And you are a
Yeah,
great
I am.
secret keeper, by the way.
So I said again.
I said you're a great secret keeper. Like I asked
Thank you.
you, and you said no. Like you'll find out. It's like
Yeah, well, I didn't say yes or no. I said, well, you you find out whether or not he's alive. But because that chapter's from Kate's perspective, the last thing she sees is Alex with a wounded shoulder going back into the clone factory control room, apparently unarmed. But she seems to have forgotten the fact that yeah, they did kill 3 clones in that control room. Those clones had weapons, so Alex was armed, and he's managed to find his way to the exit. But because that's the last we've seen of him, and Alex isn't really a point of view character, no one's known any better. And I very deliberately left it that way because, well, in real life, it would feel like that. The
well,
lack of peace in not knowing whether or not someone's still alive.
can understand why Kate didn't notice or Kate didn't remember because she was in that situation. Us reading it, why didn't we remember that the three clones were, they killed the 3 clones and he because I don't remember them killing any clones. I was just so focused on what was happening with Kate and you know so it's kind of like, that's a good writing job done there, Chris.
Thank you very much. Okay, second half of chapter 16. Tears from Kate were rare. Oh, Kate's still alive too. But now you find out why she went missing. Tears from Kate were rare, but plentiful when they came. This is actually one of my favourite scenes in the book. As far back as she could remember, she had internalised her frustration rather than let it show and be bullied for it. Most of the time it had worked, at a cost to herself. That day, it was different. Kate Arrowsmith, who had gunned down innumerable clone soldiers and slaughtered a podcopter pilot with a fork, wandered around the concrete shantytown crying her eyes out. McCormick had no idea they were alive. The survivors at home would go for days before giving up on missing friends, just as they had for Daniel. But hoping the impossible did not last forever. Kate and her friends were alone in New London, alone in a million strong sea of other prisoners. Kate had seen at least 20 faces she thought she recognised, but every last one of them belonged to a stranger. She noticed that none of the women were pregnant. This was neither a place to raise a baby nor a world to bring one into. Her faint wish to find her grannies withered when she noticed there were no elderly people either. On top of the horrifying sights, the inner city was a sensory nightmare. The sound of crowds, shouts, and crying children, the scrape of concrete beneath her boots, the smell of decay, urine, and body odour, the taste of them all in the back of her throat. None of her senses were left unscathed. She was marching alongside a mass toilet. Grant's architects had installed unisex trenches, cubed concrete buildings at 1 mile intervals. Kate tried to imagine a world where she'd have to walk a mile every time she needed the loo. But even with that world surrounding her, it was still unimaginable. Kate! Came a scream from close by. Oh no, not now. There was no point in running. She could not afford the attention it would draw to her. Ewan's hand gripped her shoulder as if she were a naughty child running around in a supermarket. Don't make yourself a target, he whispered. In case you haven't noticed, we're not popular with the locals. The locals. The people they had fought for since the beginning. The faceless crowds in Kate's imagination every night before she slept, who now hated her. With good reason, too. Kate, we need to get back. Get the hell off my shoulder, she yelled, spinning around and batting Ewan's arm to one side. Ewan staggered and clenched his teeth. She had hit his wounded arm. The one with the podcopter slash from a month ago. Or about an hour ago in Underdogs time. She made her face visible, allowing him to see the state she was in, and awaited his stunned reaction. She knew he had never seen her cry before. Dumbfounded, he took a tiny step forward and then back again, as if he wanted to offer a hug but didn't know how. Kate pretended not to notice. I'm looking for him, she muttered. Who? Alex? James, remember him? James? Your brother from Block 1? A nod. He's my favourite person, she gasped, and I owe him. I'm sorry, Kate, Ewan continued, but going after him is a stupid idea. Needle in a haystack doesn't even cover it. You won't understand, she cried. You've got nobody in here. Everyone I ever loved is in New London. So are Charlie's and Jack's families, and Raja's, Simon's, Grace's. Everyone's except yours. You said it before, Ewan. There's no one you love in here, so don't pretend you get it. It must have hurt him. He didn't say anything for a few moments. Kate was caught between a desperation to apologise and her need to stand firm. No, said Ewan, but there's 3 people I like. I don't want you running off and making it 2. Since when did you have a problem with running off? She yelled, ignorant of the prisoners now paying close attention. You abandoned the Block 1 group on takeover day just like the others. Mark screams, get bloody running, they're not worth it, and you left James along with everyone else. And you stayed with him for, how long? Another 2 minutes, maybe? Kate slapped him. It was an enormous slap, filled with a year's supply of repressed rage and delivered with strength that only a gymnast could manage. Ewan almost tumbled off his feet, and both hands clutched at his reddening face. I guess I deserved that, he gasped. Normal people apologise around now. I'm not normal, Kate, you may have gathered. I'm sorry I said that, but I'm not sorry we left the Block 1 guys. If we hadn't, the Underdogs wouldn't exist. Sometimes you have to run so you can fight another day. Yeah, Kate finished. And this is another day. Ewan let out a huge sigh, a deliberately loud one, but said nothing. He's really, really at the disabled end, Kate continued. His whole world is different from ours. Everything new or unplanned is automatically scary. Everything bright is too bright. Everything loud is too loud. And I've heard loads of people say, oh, that must be great to see the world differently. But you and I both know that's a load of crap. Sometimes it is, Kate, but sometimes it's awesome. Kate didn't want to give any sign that Ewan had influenced her, but after hearing his words, she found herself wondering how James would answer her last sentence if he could talk. He would never be. He had never been able to respond to her verbally, but she had always talked to him, always believing him to have understood her, and never talked about him like he wasn't in the room. It didn't stop him from being disabled, but he had more dignity that way. Kate looked back on her childhood, a type of childhood not shared by anyone else she knew, and remembered her codependence with James, the roles they played in each other's lives, the routines, challenges, and triumphs of growing up together, the crying and the laughter shared between 2 young people who saw the universe so differently. They'd had a sibling bond that couldn't be severed, however profound the learning difficulties, however aggressive the meltdowns, however terrifying the epileptic seizures. Her life was better because her brother was in it. The world was better because James was in it. But this world. For James, she continued, autism means he'll never show any independence. He's the best person on earth, but he's not cut out for a place like this. He deserves so much more than what he gets. He's always deserved more. I've spent every day and night for the last year wondering if he's even still alive, and you're telling me to just not bother with him." Kate stopped yelling, but only to catch her breath. Ewan seized his chance. "Kate," he said in a calm voice, "someone will have helped him. Can you imagine what Lorraine would do in here? She'd have built a hospital with her bare hands. There'll be loads of Lorraine Shepherds in here. James will be somewhere, and he'll be safe." "How can you be so sure?" Ewan gestured at the wasteland around them. "He's got nothing anyone would want." Kate swallowed the lump in her throat, and the lip skin she had bitten off by accident. The squalor around her spelt danger for her brother, but in a way, Ewan was right. "It's like this, Kate," Ewan continued. "We all get our motivation from somewhere. McCormick gets his from a general love of humans. I get mine from wanting revenge for my family. Sounds like James is the reason you're fighting this war, and it's done you a ton of good as a soldier." "I don't care," thought Kate. "I'd sacrifice every good thing about myself to get James out of here." "But you'll never find him like this," Ewan finished. "Not in 100 years. And even if you find him, you can't free him. You can only do that from outside. Don't let guilt control you, Kate. Don't let it make your decisions." Kate nodded, as common sense took over and she finally saw the truth in all its sensible ugliness. James wouldn't be found by taking random paths through the inner city. But all the same, Ewan's advice was too late. Guilt had already made her decisions. It had turned her into a fighter. It had kept her alive as her friends had died around her. The others had been surviving for the sake of surviving, but Kate had lived because of unfinished business. Okay, fine. She was not fine. Nothing was fine. She was just coping. Then again, most of her life had followed that pattern. In an odd way, she was still in her comfort zone. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and found them replaced with more. "I'm still crying. What the hell?" Ewan was wearing a sympathetic face, and just for a second, his leadership side seemed to fade. So did the control freak from a few minutes earlier, committed to telling her she was wrong. He became the likable Ewan West again, the one who smiled. In fact, he was planning more than a smile. As he came in for a hug, Kate found Ewan's cheek pressed against hers. That was unusual enough. This place must do crazy things to people. That and everything we've gone through today. He's not thinking straight. "Nobody's watching now, Kate," Ewan whispered. "We're just in the background." He repositioned his head, and Kate saw the shape of his lips. There was only one right thing to do. "I'm going out with Raj," she gasped. Ewan froze in place, as did Kate. To an outsider, the scene must have looked like a game of musical statues where the music had stopped at an embarrassing moment. "You didn't know either then?" she asked. Ewan aborted the hug and stepped back, then checked the surroundings with nervous eyes. Apparently, he wasn't so sure that nobody was watching. But despite the tightly packed houses and dense population, the prisoners took no notice. His face looked uncomfortable, as it always did when people denied him something he wanted. His breathing deepened, and Kate saw the warning signs of one of his Oakenfold era meltdowns. But then Ewan seemed to collect himself, and after half a minute of wandering around with his hands on the side of his head, he turned and rejoined the conversation. He looked at Kate's face, calmed down, and spoke normally. It was like he had won a fight against himself. "I had no idea," he said. "How long?" "2 months," Kate answered. "We don't want to spread the news, but some people have worked it out. Lorraine for definite. Maybe a few others. I I guess I'm just not very perceptive. Half of Spitfire's rise aren't very perceptive." Ewan smiled and lowered his arms. Kate found herself happy with Ewan. Her mainstream years had been filled with random boys not taking no for an answer, acting like she wasn't allowed to refuse, or making her feel guilty for not doing what they wanted. Despite his own neurological disadvantages, Ewan had heard no and stopped. It was a rare act of chivalry, and Kate appreciated it. But wait, thought Kate, should I really be happy with him for doing what boys should just do anyway? Shouldn't Ewan's way be the normal way and not some kind of exception? Whatever his faults and whatever his challenges, Ewan was trustworthy. But so was Raj, and Raj's influence was so much more calming. He had the soft humour and positive manner that made Spitfire's rise bearable for Kate, plus a constant, but not intrusive, interest in how her mind worked, in order to learn how best to accommodate her, in both her best and worst moments. Raj could see her anxiety coming long before any other young person in the house, and was always open as a source of comfort. The thought of him alone was calming. Kate could never have those kind of feelings for Ewan, but she valued him all the same. Ewan was a troubled but trustworthy young man who was accessing the world in the best way he knew how. "Ewan," she said, "don't take it personally. You're probably my best friend, and it's not like I say that to many people." She scratched the back of her neck out of nervousness, and her fingers brushed against the rucksack. She had fled the Roland shelter without even realizing it was on her back. Just another little fact lost in the chaos. Best friend except Thomas, of course. What? Asked Ewan in pretend shock. I've been sidelined by a 9-year-old boy? He's cute, he's funny, and he makes me happy. Well, he'd be more than welcome in here right now. Ewan's sentence trailed off. He must have seen the state of New London's children. Anxious to avoid a miserable silence, Kate threw out some words. So if I embarrassed you, Ewan, I just. No, you didn't. Roger's a lucky guy. And I hope you know. Forget it, it's fine. Kate and Ewan propped themselves up against the toilet block, trying in vain to ignore the stench emanating from the vent holes. That reminds me, started Kate, changing the subject as fast as she could. What upset Jack last night? Hmm? Back in Lemsford, when we were staying in the Hunter's house, we were mid banter and then he fell silent. Wow, that was really last night, not half a week ago. You're going to have to remind me, said Ewan. Charlie said something about him and Gracie, and the last time he kissed a woman, he called her mummy. Well, his mum's dead for starters, said Ewan. Cancer when he was 12. The words physically hurt Kate's ears. Her worst nightmare throughout her childhood years had been suffered in real life by a close friend, and she had not even known. Then again, Jack kept a lot of things inside his brain. And Gracie, Ewan continued, let's just say romance doesn't cross his mind much. He explained it to me once, after David and Val were murdered. Kate remembered that night. Ewan and Jack had been the sole survivors of the war's most traumatic mission, when Oliver Roth had made a wife kill her husband in exchange for a quick death. I'm pretty sure that was referenced a few chapters ago. Back home, Ewan and Jack had found the previous homeowner's stash of wine and drank until they could barely function. McCormick hadn't even punished them. They'd been through enough that day. He spent most of the night talking about retro video games, Ewan continued, from the good old days before any of us were born, or dinosaur skeletons he'd seen in the Natural History Museum. The amount of times he mentioned that bloody Ankylosaurus. He needed escapism, I guess. But he talks about romance too. He was pretty drunk, but understood him. Every time he looks into a girl's eyes, he never sees the same kind of beauty that most people see. He sees beauty in the complex design of the human eyeball and how all the bits of the body slot together to make the ultimate machine. Or something like that, anyway. He probably sees it as more beautiful than anything romantic he could see in them. Kate felt conflicted. She couldn't tell whether that was sad or amazing, but it was amazing to Jack, and that's what counted. Oh yeah, Jack is the oh, high five, Rofe. Jack is clearly and obviously asexual, but he does not know it. He's never had a word for it. Here we go. She glanced up and around for landmarks, double checking that she still remembered the route to the Rowlands. One wrong turn could get her and Ewan lost for days. She noticed her tears were gone too, as was her motivation to search for James. She had grown to accept that she was more useful to him outside the citadel. So what's your thing? She asked. What? I'm autistic, Charlie has ADHD, Raj is dyslexic. What about you? I'm autistic too. But isn't there something else? Yeah. Kate paused, but Ewan didn't elaborate. Oh, hey, Jenny. Thanks for coming along. Remember Stuart? She continued. The old guy who did geography at Oakenfold? We talked about you once. He told me there was another diagnosis and he wasn't very nice about it. Stuart should have been fired long before takeover day. I wasn't the only student he hated. He said it made you manipulative and being afraid of being told to do things. He was right, said Ewan. Anyway, ready to head back? Kate, for once, took a hint. She led the way back to the Rowlands, through the maze of improvised houses and squalor, abandoning her faint hopes of a family reunion. Mark had been wrong on takeover day. James was worth everything, even if Kate was the only one who knew it. Her brother, her amazing, vulnerable older brother, it was worth surrendering every strength she had to find that bond with him again. Not today, James, she thought, but one day. I swear it. End of chapter 16. And yep, that was a long one.
I can relate to Kate so much. Like, I would have been the same way in that situation. I was like, I'm with you, Kate, on this one. And I could never have imagined Kate and Raj. I could have imagined Kate and Ewan, though. So I'm not sure what happened there.
There are a few hints in the early chapters.
Well, I
For
guess like
example,
Ewan.
when they're just about to leave, and Kate is with Raj and Thomas in the farm, and um, that Yeah, that's it. Ewan takes Thomas away because Kate says, "Could you just have a few minutes with Raj?" And Thomas asks Ewan when they're in the tunnel, "Why is she being alone with Raj?" And Ewan, being as perceptive as Ewan is, says, "Oh, I don't know. I just hope they're quick about it."
I think
Yeah,
like
it turns out there are romantic reasons why they
yeah,
want a few more
it's
minutes together, and yeah, that's the first time it's just overtly said, but it's not a secret from this point on.
well, I'm not as perceptive too, so because that's what's going on. But all right, so there's a lot to unpack here as well. So all of them have separated. Um, Kate and Ewan are together. Alex is alive. He's completely in a different place. McCormick doesn't know about any of them, what's going on, and I can only imagine the stress he is under. Um,
Mhm.
let's move on to chapter 17 before I become McCormick and come under the same stress. But anyway, I wanted to say hi to Jenny too. Jenny, hi. I hope you're good. And I miss you in the stream today.
Mm, okay. Chapter 17, and this one is surprisingly short compared to the others. Hidden in the Roland shelter, Jack peeked out between two planks of wood. Bloody hell, the inner city was ugly. They could at least have sorted the houses into rows and columns and turned the twisted pathways into actual streets. They could have set up marketplace style squares for events or town meetings, or reserved a big patch for a clinic or a school. If Jack had been trapped in here with the rest of them, he could have been a masterly town planner. Except, of course, that would have involved people listening to him. The Rolands had balked the moment they had heard the word special school. In here, just like back in the old days, people tried to brainwash him into thinking his autism made him inferior. Some kind of genius, according to the stereotype, but somehow still inferior. Mark would have fitted in perfectly here, Charlie said to him, if he'd been in that youth offending place on takeover day. Once they'd brought him here, he'd have set out and conquered the whole city. Nah, Jack answered. I'm willing to bet the prisoners were shot inside their cells. Herding a nation into the citadels would have been tricky enough without the risky prisoners. Come to think of it, they might not have even wasted the bullets. They probably just left them to starve. Charlie snorted. You're the life of the party, Jack, you know that? Jack stopped stimming his fingers to squeeze them against the casing of the podcopter gun in his lap. An hour in this prison would have been draining enough, even without Charlie for company. It was imprisonment without routine, probably worse than the kind Mark had endured. Walls were fine as long as your life had structure. This place was like watching an infinite hourglass. Speaking of death, Charlie said to Patrick, what happens to bodies here? I mean, there must have been loads of people dying in the early days, right? Jack raised an eyebrow, not at Charlie's blunt question, but at the lack of reaction from their hosts. Neither Ruth nor the younger men seemed bothered, and Patrick gave his answer without his expression changing. Mobile incineration unit, he said. Seriously? Yep. Can't bury them under concrete. They can't possibly get vehicles along these roads, said Jack. No, they can't, answered Aidan. These things fly. They scout over the houses every few days, usually at night. There are stories going around, started Patrick, that in the early days, people woke up one morning and saw that the dead bodies outside had vanished. No idea how. But then they put two and two together, worked out that Grant was clearing them, and then they started to kill their neighbours. Charlie looked shocked. Jack did not. Let me guess, he muttered. They were waiting for a collection truck to pick up the bodies and hoping to ride it out. You've got it, Patrick continued. You can imagine their reaction when the mobile incinerator flew in, towed up the bodies with hooks and ropes, and cremated them there and then. Those people had killed their friends for no benefit. Probably stung a bit. Patrick, Ruth, Aidan, and Benjamin had indifference in their eyes, which Jack understood but hated. His friends back home had a real and honest love for each other, although none of them would have dared use the word love. To them, it was inconceivable that people could turn against their friends so easily. The good doctor had united them far too well. Hmm. Sorry, guys, said Benjamin, but that's just the way life is here. The courts won't stick up for you anymore, the police don't exist, and money means nothing. Whoever has the resources makes the rules. You'll learn the ropes as you go along, I'm sure. We're not planning on staying that long, Charlie grunted. Thanks, though. Jack noticed the grin shared between Aidan and Benjamin, which he had seen in the faces of 100 other people who hadn't taken him seriously in his old life. He hid his annoyance and let his mind wander. Naturally, it landed on the mystery he hadn't yet solved. How the hell did Shannon get out of here? She had stabbed those clones outside the citadel, so she had been around here at some point. Jack had assumed she'd lived in the outer city, since Keith Tyler kept boasting about how important she was. Then again, what kind of floor A pampered lady would have torn clothes and bare feet? There were three possibilities, all of them ridiculous. Number one, Shannon had lived in the inner city, then been plucked out and transported to Lieutenant Lambourne's place for some reason. Number two, she had lived a scruffy lifestyle in the outer city, despite its luxuries. Number three, she had never lived in the citadel at all, and just happened to be outside its walls by coincidence. So, New London? Said Aidan. Hmm? You called this place New London a while ago. Is that an official name for it, or? Yep, New London Citadel and Habitation Complex. We saw it on some stolen paperwork. So we. Jack was interrupted by a bang, which he recognised all too well, and the zip of a bullet that flew past his nose and punctured the rusting walls. As he and Charlie spun around and snatched at their holsters, their eyes were met with the sight of well-built, raggedy men with pistols. There were 5 of them at the front entrance, the head of the pack aiming 2 weapons at once. Jack found his hand stopping at his side, and Charlie did the same. Surrender had never been an option against clones. Either you fought back or you died. Humans, however, could be bargained with. They had fired a warning shot after all. Don't even think about moving, snarled the figure at the front. Hands on table, now. The rebels obeyed, with gritted teeth and hatred in their faces. The Romans obeyed too, with the casual attitude of passengers going through airport security. Like the head bully at every school, the lead man's stature and body language told the underdogs all they needed to know. He strutted around with a sense of comfort, his jaw hanging on one side as if smoking a cigar. The 2 deep scars on each side of his face looked self-inflicted. Maybe he'd given himself a makeover to induce fear in his enemies. But the scariest part of him was his eyes, his cool blue eyeballs that showed vicious malice and self-control at the same time, almost like an older and less humorous Oliver Roth. That copter gun, he barked. All your small arms, anything what shoots bullets. They're mine now. Jack kept his hands motionless as the scarred man's cronies marched into the shack and rummaged through his pockets. They did the same to Charlie, who twitched with discomfort and growing anger. To be fair to him, he's doing well here. Never seen you before, the scar-faced man said with vague interest. My name's the Lord. I run this place. I run this house, and the houses around it, and the houses around them. Don't do nothing stupid. Potts, Dave, minigun first, now. Jack couldn't tell which was Potts and which was Dave. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't care. But he wanted to learn about these thieves. Know your enemy and all that. Gareth, watch your geek's hands. Sean, check the short kid's pockets too. Charlie's eyebrows deepened. He did not like being called the short kid. Charlie, don't you dare have one of your moments now. Potts and Dave carried the minigun to the bulky arms of its new owner. The Lord held it in his arms like an overgrown newborn, his face lighting up like a new father. And you, the Lord? You're really calling yourself that? He's clean now, said Gareth with disappointment in his voice, having taken nothing more from Jack than an assault rifle. It surprised Jack how naked he felt without his weapons. With bare hands, what else could distinguish them from the other millions of prisoners? What right would they have to call themselves Britain's last line of defence? After the house was stripped bare of any possible revenge weapons, the Lord and his clan vanished as quickly as they had arrived. No goodbye message, not even a threat. None had been necessary. Half a minute passed before Patrick Rowland broke the silence. I'm so sorry. Never mind sorry, barked Charlie, unleashing his build-up of contained anger. Who the bloody hell was that? We're supposed to call him the Lord. The Lord. Screw him. Scarface bloody... Charlie, muttered Jack. Get some fresh air. Give yourself 10 minutes. Charlie turned his infuriated face back to Jack, half a second from releasing a tirade of abuse, and then something amazing happened. Jack watched in surprise and delight as Charlie Coleman, trapped in a bad mood for a good reason, decided to shut up, storm outside, and take a few deep breaths. Ewan and McCormick would have been proud of him. Once Charlie was gone, Jack came to realise how nervous he felt. His hands and fingers were in full throttle, shaking themselves around to bring him just a little physical comfort. Patrick was diplomatic enough to not mention it. According to the legends, Patrick said, his name was once Paul Green. He used to be a painter decorator. I bet he never saw his life taking this kind of turn, being prison top dog and all. Jack spat a disgusted laugh. The Lord knew his way around posturing, but his authority was fake. He was just as vulnerable to Grant's forces as the rest of New London, whether or not he believed it. Just like the bullies had held no genuine power over him at school, even though they had driven him to... Where did they get those weapons, he asked. And how much of the citadel does he think he controls? Only the places they go to, answered Benjamin. Probably a mile's radius. As for their weapons, we don't know for sure. Someone must have smuggled them in on takeover day. Someone smart enough to save them for the inside. But the guns aren't the real currency here. The bullets are. They've got no supplier, so your ammo probably doubled their stash. Jack clawed a hand against the underside of the table. The robbery had not only put his friends at a disadvantage, it would keep the Lord on his little throne for even longer. Aidan rose to his feet and darted for the entrance. As he ran into the open, Jack heard the noises too. Familiar voices in a land of strangers. He made his way outside to see Ewan and Kate returning, their words growing louder as they approached. Really? Asked Kate. You never think about things like that? Every day I dream about going home and flopping onto my old bed. I'm staying away from my old house, thanks. I'd rather avoid Mum and Dad's corpses. And my aunts, uncles, and little Alfies. Oh, yeah, sorry. But where would you go? If we win this war and society gets back to normal, where would you call home? I'd probably occupy Oakenfold, Ewan said with a shrug, making my own little empire. The one place that makes sense in a world where Ewan's words ended as he saw Jack's face. The colour went out of his cheeks, and the humour vanished from his voice. Talk to me, Jack, he said. What's wrong? Jack took a deep breath and spoke with a mourning tone. Do you and Kate still have your handguns and the rucksack? Of course. Why? Jack opened his mouth, but Ewan didn't wait for an answer. Once he heard Charlie's furious yells in the background, he ran into the Rowlands' home and looked despondently across the emptied floor. Protect those guns like your children, Jack said. They're the only weapons we have left. End of chapter 17.
I have a question. So, all this
Yes.
time we were reading chapter 17, I was thinking about McCormick and how he's thinking that he's lost his team members and how he's stressed. Why isn't McCormick going to check in on them? Or, like, why? I mean, at this point, it's like an urgent situation. He's going to lose all of them in his mind or not. So, why is he still in Spitfire's Rise?
Well, he's in the comms units, a day's walk away from New London. He's unable to actually provide any practical assistance to them. And the reason that he can't even call them up is because whenever the underdogs aren't using their phones, they've got the phones switched off. Otherwise, they can be tracked. So even if he tried calling them, he's not going to get any answers.
Yeah, but, I would think that a normal response, like if I was instead, I would have ran to where they were last to check in on them, whether they're still alive or not, because they're the only ones left in his team, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. We talk about the ones back in Spitfire's Rise.
What?
Oh, sorry. I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about the ones in New London. Right. Okay, but bear in mind, McCormick does not yet know that anything is amiss at Spitfire's Rise.
Yeah.
He sent Simon back. Simon
Yeah,
has not yet returned. That's all he knows.
that's all he knows. Okay. I don't know
If
this.
we are reading another chapter, though, you're about to find out some stuff about that particular topic.
Okay, let's
Oh,
let's go ahead. Let's go
okay
ahead.
then.
Chapter 18. I hope it doesn't
Okay.
end at a cliffhanger though. 'Cause that would not
Um,
be nice.
it's not quite a just like that Kate was missing type of ending. That's
Okay.
I shall leave it to you to decide really.
All right.
So, chapter 18. McCormick sat alone in the silent attic of the Boys' Brigade Hall, surrounded by soft camping lights and phones that refused to ring. He had not felt so alone since the days following Barbara's death. But back then, at least Polly had been there to pick up the pieces. Oh yeah, just to remind you, Barbara was his wife. I think it's mentioned this already. It's even if not, it's really not that much of a spoiler. But Barbara died 3 years ago, and after that, he basically lived with a friend of his called Polly, and she was kind of there to look after him.
I don't think it was
McCormick,
mentioned.
cool. McCormick let his thoughts wander to Polly, mainly to distract himself from the day's events. Polly, Barbara's best friend up to her death, had spent 2 years rebuilding the bereaved Joseph McCormick, who brought the real him back into the world for no visible reward. Without Polly Jones, there would have been no underdogs. Her help had come to an abrupt end on takeover day. Perhaps the memory of her falling corpse was the reason McCormick spent so little time thinking about her. McCormick felt guilty. Polly deserved better than that. The front door creaked open, but the footsteps were not Simon's. They were fast and light. All the worst possibilities ran through McCormick's head. The probability of being discovered was almost zero, but even mathematics lecturers had illogical fears. He held his breath and reached for the pistol he kept hidden in a side drawer. He exhaled with relief as the intruder made loud noises against the ladder. No assassin was that clumsy. But the gasps sounds like they came from a child, and that would mean Thomas? Hi, the boy whispered with a grin, pushing his head through the trapdoor as if playing peekaboo. What are you doing here? Nice to see you too. Thomas, you're not supposed to leave the house. Why did Lorraine let you come here? I don't think she knows, unless Mark told her. He sent me here. McCormick had no idea how to react. Confusion and anxiety fought for his attention. Thomas slipped through the trapdoor with smooth movements that must have been perfected over years of sneaking downstairs past his bedtime. Why did Mark send you here? McCormick asked, both needing and fearing the answer. To tell you about his mission. They've probably gone already. McCormick felt his esophagus close, as if his anxieties had become a physical hand that clenched around his throat. A tremor shook its way down his aging spine. What mission? He gasped. Thomas started to look nervous, but answered honestly as always. The attack on Dr. Lambourne's health centre, or whoever he was. The place Shannon was going to. An assault we decided would be marching into a slaughter. Everyone but Ewan, rest his soul. McCormick's hands gripped one another, as if in prayer. He could not bear the thought of losing Ewan, Kate, Charlie, and Jack, followed by Mark and everyone he had manipulated, all in the same day. It would be the end of the war in every practical sense. He closed his eyes and tried to pretend he hadn't always believed the war would end this way, with most of his friends dead and Nicholas Grant unopposed. Did I do something wrong? No, Thomas, not you. Mark wants you to ring him. Ring his phone or ring his neck, McCormick grumbled as he picked up the phone, and hoped that a call from Alex wouldn't come in the next few minutes while the phone was engaged. 5 rings before an answer. It was almost like Mark wanted him to feel powerless. His behaviour must have followed years of choosing not to engage with lessons, not to avoid learning, but to demonstrate that he had the power to ignore the staff whenever he wished. Yep, came the eventual answer. McCormick noticed that the phone's camera showed only Mark's ear. The young man had accepted the phone call, but wasn't willing to endure a video conversation. Mark, McCormick started, with the authority gone from his voice. Turn around and head home. There's too much at stake. No can do, old man. I'm not waiting around to die in Spitfire's eyes like a good boy. If you and the guys are dead, we both know it's over. Might as well smack 'em in the face before we go down. Who's with you? Raj, Gracie, and Simon. I left Lorraine to look after the girl. Figured it was the safer option. Mark spoke with the tone of an officer in command, as if the tragedy on the battlefront had left a vacancy just for him. Ewan's body had not yet gone cold, and Mark Gunnarsson had already stepped into his shoes. It's not up to you to decide what's safe, said McCormick. Shannon pulled a knife on Thomas, you know. That's why I sent him to you, away from this girl you keep coddling, despite all the evidence of her being a complete psychopath. We're not as united by our differences as you think we are. McCormick looked at Thomas. There was concern in his eyes, but no trauma. It was impossible to tell whether Mark was being truthful. We'll be at Lambourne's front door by early evening, and I'll let you know what we found. If I don't, just add us to the memorial wall. Mark, please don't throw your life away like this. At least let the others go home. You think they don't want to be with me? Scoffed Mark. The war's lost, and you're the only numpty who doesn't know it. Or do I? Thought McCormick. Mark, McCormick asked, there's a chain of command. Without it, we never would have lasted. Don't you have some tragic news to break to a small child? Thomas was pretty attached to Kate, if you hadn't noticed. In case you don't call back, it's been an honour serving with you. Or whatever. The line went dead, and McCormick lost another 4 friends. Me, Thomas, Lorraine, Alex, Shannon. We're the only underdogs left. A numbness overcame McCormick's brain and spread through his body as if following his bloodstream, just like the moment Barbara finally passed away at his side, when all those months of fear and panic suddenly had nowhere to go. The exact opposite had happened when Polly died. Then again, there had been no time to mourn her as the gun had been turned towards him. Are you okay? Thomas asked. McCormick shook his head. How are Kate and the others doing? Thomas asked. I've been worried about them. Do I tell him the truth and completely destroy him? Do I lie to him and possibly destroy his trust in me? Do I avoid the question and run the risk of him noticing? Should I save the news for when Mark and the others die and break all the horrible news in one go? This was not a mathematical equation that could be solved with an objectively correct answer. This dilemma involved human emotions, a world where numbers held no power. In the end, McCormick gave the only answer that came to his mind. He reached over to Thomas, wrapped him up in one arm, and held him close. The boy did not seem to mind, and with the only witness looking over his shoulder, the first tears could fall from McCormick's eyes unseen. Okay, paragraph break. And changing scene. Last one of the evening. Well, my evening, your afternoon. Raj had been looking forward to watching the sunset. It would have been nice to see it one last time. Instead, Mark had taken them through a town on the outskirts of Hartford, and the sunset was blocked by a row of shops at his side. Well, at least this won't be the worst thing that happens today. Of course, worse things had already happened. The more Raj tried to keep Kate out of his head, the more space she took up. He had spent years boasting about his dyslexic ability to see the whole picture in any situation, but that made it impossible to avoid the more horrible details. Mark strode along the tarmac at the head of the group, with confidence in his step as if nothing had happened at all. He seemed perfectly suited to his self appointed role as head soldier, but maybe he was just enjoying the job while it lasted. Gracie was a few steps behind, window shopping in the department stores they walked past, perhaps not aware of how dangerous their mission was. But Simon was under no illusions. Each time Raj glanced behind him, it became more obvious that Simon only kept up to avoid getting lost. How much further? Asked Gracie, clearly bored. Half a mile, answered Mark. Better slow down. Raj closed his eyes and his stomach dropped a little further. Half a mile, then one of two things would happen. The most likely option was death, but there was an alternative, unlikely as it was. The four of them could break into the health centre with guns blazing, wipe out every single clone, put Lieutenant Lambourne on his knees, and wait for Mark to extract the information he wanted. And after that, the war would still be a lost cause. Raj jogged to the front of the group and whispered towards Mark. Mate, he started, have you thought about what happens if we don't die? Yeah, there's a basic plan, Mark grunted. Find out what's so important about the place, tell her old man, grab the spare ammo and head home. An ice-cold logical answer from an ice-cold man. Raj was not satisfied. He looked backwards at Gracie and held out a straightened hand that instructed her to slow down. She did as she was told, and lined up with Simon out of earshot. Mark, why are we really here? The one last slap in the face explanation doesn't work for me. At first, Mark did not answer. He held up the map, a page he had torn from the road atlas back home, and calculated which way to go at the fork ahead. He marched off, gave Raj just enough time to think he was being ignored, and then whispered, Truth matters, Raj. Pardon? Humans are obsessed with reasons, with finding out why. It's the reason our species has advanced beyond all the others. Mark double checked the distance between them and their teammates and whispered, My dad was an abusive piece of crap. When I was 6, he whacked me around the face with the head of a hosepipe because it got in the way while he was washing the car. For years I thought I was the reason, but no way. People don't do things like that just because kids are annoying. Raj did not speak. There was no obvious way to react. Compassion wouldn't be what Mark was after. He put out a cigarette on me a few months later. I looked for a reason, but there wasn't any. And the third time he did something bad, he didn't even seem bothered. Was he on drugs? Alcohol? Nope, neither. There's no there's no way Mark would be telling me this, Raj thought, if he planned to survive the night. It went on as I grew up. Mum did bugger all. He was probably doing stuff to her too. Didn't stop for a decade until I went into the youth offender institution. I never told you how I got in, did I? You never told anyone. Was it some terrible secret, or did you just think the mystery made you more fearsome? I stabbed him. Raj didn't answer. The wind rang through the alleys between the shops, but the rest of Hartford was silent. In the thigh, missed his femoral artery by millimetres. And in the interview, the police asked me why. How bloody dare they? Was it self-defense or revenge? Justice. Really, though? Revenge. Told them it was defense, though. But I committed one crime with a valid reason and went down for it. He committed loads of them for years with no obvious reason, and all he got was a knife in the leg for a few seconds. He'll have had a reason, Mark. A stupid reason, but a reason. And whatever it was, it's his fault and not yours. Nobody's to blame for their own abuse. Yeah, said Mark, halting in his tracks. But I'll never know why he did it. And there's nothing in life that haunts me more. He looked straight into Raj's eyeballs and finished his confession. Go ahead and spend all the time you want searching for God, whichever one you actually worship. You'll never meet anyone who values universal truth more than me. Because if you can't find the truth in the one place that matters, you look for it everywhere else. That's why we're here. When we rescued Shannon, she thanked us by sending 5 of us to die in New London, all for some clone killing tour that might not even exist. We might find the truth in Lamborn's headquarters, and I'm willing to die searching for it. Mark, suicide strikes don't win wars. I'm not aiming to win the war, Raj. I just need to find out why we lost. Raj looked towards the approaching Simon and Gracie. Mark reverted back to his usual self the moment they arrived, as if his outpouring had never happened. How long until we can go home? Gracie asked. Gracie, you follow me, Mark answered. The health centre's round the next corner. If they have any sense, there'll be a guard on each entrance. Raj, Simon, run to the other side of the road. Once you get there, give us covering fire. So we're running first, muttered Raj. Why not? If the first thing they see is Simon's face, they'll underestimate us. Besides, once they're distracted enough, they'll take longer to aim at me and Gracie while we approach. Then what? Asked Gracie. What happens when we get inside? She said when, not if. She has no idea what danger we're in. Stay away from the windows, keep your back to the wall, then focus your fire down the biggest corridor you see. Raj and Simon will run to the entrance, picking off anyone approaching us from behind. Oh, and then it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to killing all the clones and taking Lamborn, Raj groaned. You got it. Ready? No, but you're not really asking, are you? Let's go, Raj said with a sigh. The team headed for the newsagent on the corner. The shop had glass windows on both exterior walls, at an angle that allowed Raj to see through both. Through the dusted glass and along the final street, he could make out the shape of a one-story building and a blue NHS sign. Nothing else. Yeah, I don't mean to brag, but we've got a National Health Service over here. Amazingly, he found the time to say a short prayer before Mark shouted, Go! Rod raised his rifle and leapt into the street, Simon a few moments behind. He spotted the porchway of a jeweller's that would offer cover, and ran to reach it before someone could open fire and shoot him to death. It wasn't until he arrived that he looked at the health centre and found nobody on guard outside. Back at the corner shop, Mark crept along the road like a stalking cat, his shotgun pointed at the entrance and Gracie hidden behind his back. No guards, he whispered to Simon. Maybe they don't want to draw attention to the place. Raj was surprised it hadn't occurred to him before. Putting clones outside would make it the most visibly active building in Hertfordshire. He left his cover and jogged over to Mark and Gracie. Mark didn't complain. He must have reached the same conclusion. When Raj was close enough to see through the windows, he found nobody on the other side. He and his friends walked through the entrance without a shot fired. You realise, Raj whispered, this is the most obvious trap in the history of traps? Behind him, Simon shuddered. Gracie's eyes looked back to the street and her jaw hung open, as if about to ask whether she could change her mind. Whatever, said Mark. I wasn't expecting to survive this anyway. What? Asked Gracie, her voice far louder than a whisper. You knew this was dangerous? No such thing as a safe mission, Gracie. Now man up and get ready. She ran. Raj didn't call her back. He couldn't afford the volume. When he prepared to run after her, Mark's hand landed on his shoulder. Don't. They'll only shoot you too. Gracie Freeman ran back up the road in plain sight, as fast as her tired feet could manage. Raj tensed his ears for the inevitable gunshot that would kill his old classmate, and readied himself for the inevitable hail of bullets that would fly at him moments later. But the bullet never came. Gracie vanished, alive and well, back to the safety of the corner shop. Raj looked back at his remaining friends, and found Simon waving a hand in front of his nose. Mark poked his own nostrils inside the health centre, and scrunched up his face. You're right, Simon, he said. It stinks in there. What do you think they've been doing? Something with chemicals? Not that kind of smell, Raj. Mark leapt into the corridor, his rifle pointed high. Raj followed, coughing his way through the stench. The further into the health centre he ventured, the more recognisable the smell became. He reached reception and found 3 dead bodies in the waiting room. Raj gazed at the bodies and froze in confusion. It would have been a perfect moment for a clone to pop up and shoot him dead, if the building had been populated. The dead bodies wore no uniform, and their hands were empty of weapons. Gunshot wounds painted their chests, and a single bullet had been fired into each of their heads at close range. Their killer had hung around to make sure they were dead. Found another 2 in here, said Mark from behind the reception desk. They're not soldiers either, just regular people. Clinic staff? Do they look like year-old skeletons? These people died a few days ago. Raj saw Simon waving from one of the consultation rooms. He jogged over and shielded his eyes when he saw what lay inside. Spread across the floor of what had once been a doctor's office, a man with a cut throat lay dead in a pool of his own blood. No bullet wounds, Raj whispered. Simon gestured towards the man's hands and feet. The circular bruises were still in place around his wrists and ankles. bruises that could only have come from handcuffs fastened too tight. Mark, Raj called across Health Centre. We found Lieutenant Lambourne. What, is he wearing ID or something? No, but someone went to an effort with him. Mark made his way over. When he arrived, he was holding a blood-covered pillow in one hand. Bloody hell, he said upon seeing the body. They really wanted him to suffer. Yeah, said Raj. They cuffed him, cut his throat, and let him bleed. And they took their time, which meant he must have watched everyone else die first. Lambourne must have felt very lonely at the end. Simon pointed to the pillow and shrugged his shoulders. Some of the officers had been turned into the bedrooms, said Mark. People lived here before Tyler and his clones came along. You saw those bullets in the head, right? That was Tyler's work. Raj wiped his brow. He knew what this meant. Shannon wasn't being taken here, he said. She was being taken from here. End of chapter 18.
I think, I actually thought that Raj was going to die in this chapter. I don't know why. I had a feeling. I was like, Raj's going to die. I'm glad he didn't, though. Okay, well.
It's surprising. Pretty much everyone who's spoken about this chapter says they were expecting some kind of really fierce gunfight. The last thing they're expecting was a load of dead bodies, and find that Lieutenant Lambourne is actually already dead.
I wonder who did that, though.
Well, Keith Tyler killed them all.
Why?
Why and what exactly is going on? Not explained yet, but you do get an explanation in the next chapter.
I feel like it's going to twist again, and it wouldn't be Keith Tyler and somebody else, but you said Keith Tyler. I feel like you're playing games with me, to be honest, at this point. Some kind of games.
Kind of part of my job description, I guess.
All right. So we wait until next month to find out what happens next. Chris, do you mind giving us a few updates about your upcoming projects, and then maybe we can wrap up?
Well, right at the start of this video, the Kickstarter campaign for What Do You Love Most About Life has just ended. So now it's basically going to be sent out to everyone who's pre-ordered it. It won't be available on Amazon afterwards, but I will have approximately 900 copies at my house, which I can sell and send out from there. So it'll still be obtainable in some way, shape, or form. The reason it's not going to be on Amazon is because the previous version of the book was on Amazon, but the warehousing costs just made it too expensive to keep it up there. So I'm doing this one entirely independently now. Meanwhile, Underdogs 4 is now 1 month closer to its magical publishing date, and copy edits are going rather well, quite intensely, because it is you think that's an intense book? Oh wow! I'm saying literally nothing about Uprising other than it cranks up the intensity levels about as high as I can possibly go because I only have one novel left to do as much as I can with the characters I have. And on a lighter note, there's Oscar Smith's Speedcuber, the children's book, which not much progress is needed to be made on that one. That's just on time. It should be published in September.
This year, September?
Yes.
Oh, wow. You were quick. I feel like it was only just yesterday you announced that you're going to be... wow, okay. So is that...
Being quite quick, yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's by regular publishing standards, it's quite quick. And also, there's a big bunch of neurodiversity related books in the same series. So it's not just my book they're working on. We do also have an illustrator for Oscar Smith's Speed Cure as well. His name's Tim Stringer. And once I found out, looked him up on Instagram, and my partner can testify to this. I actually went, yes, when I saw his artwork, because it's basically the exact kind of art style that I was kind of hoping they'd give the book. Oh, and also he's
his name was?
As well. So, sorry?
What did you say his name was?
Tim Stringer. An openly autistic illustrator, and not only did they ask an autistic author to write the story, they got an autistic illustrator to illustrate the story. So that's quite cool.
I am actually checking out the profile right now, and I love it. Ooh. Are you going to be sharing some of the like teasers of the illustrations or something like that?
Only if I'm allowed, and I haven't had a discussion as to what I'm allowed to share and when just yet. More
Okay.
than likely, I'll probably wait for Tim to share it, and then I'll just share it from him, since it'll be obviously his work.
All right. Awesome. So I just would like to end on this one thing. Is it
Mhm.
possible for you to kind of give us a teaser from the next chapter? Something that doesn't give us a spoiler, but kind
Mhm.
of hooks us on.
Okay. Well, I can tell you who's basically in it, and it's an unusual one. You've only had Ian Marshall being the point of view character in one chapter before, and
Hmm.
that was when he called up Oliver Roth and let him loose. The next one is another Ian Marshall uh, chapter where he and Nathaniel Pierce, former best friend and the other half of Marshall Pierce Solutions, who these days hate each other, they're watching Oliver Roth do something or other in a room next to them. And at some points, let me find it.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I was just about to say the line that's going to pique your interest most is when Marshall turns to Pierce and says, "We need to talk about Shannon."
Okay. I
So
was
I know
about
I'm
to
saying
ask
nothing more than that.
you. Does any of the underdogs, like the ones who are not with McCormick, do they meet with McCormick? Do they get back to him? Does he know they're alive? Or is that too
Bear
much?
in mind uh, there's nothing really threatening the people at the health centre right now. So really, their lives are just not at risk.
But he
And
doesn't know
the
that, right?
yeah, but he's going to find out. I think Mark did say that he'd call him back and give him some details.
Okay. All right. I think we have enough
I think you're
to.
just really worried about McCormick, aren't you?
I am.
Because he knows that Shannon's alive. He knows that Thomas is alive. He knows that Lorraine is alive,
For some reason,
and he
I'm
knows that
like feeling.
Alex is alive but wounded and really far away. Four of them are missing, presumed dead, and the other four also missing, presumed dead. So yeah, he's having a tough day.
Yeah, so like I'm kind of like I'm feeling like I'm feeling anxious. Like he's presuming them dead, and so that's making him. I'm sure there's an earthquake inside of him. I'm not sure how he's managing that without knowing all of that. But anyway, that's for the next month. Any parting words, Chris? Thank you so much for doing this for us. I appreciate you more than you know. And I'm looking forward for the next episode of
Yeah.
Book Reading with Chris. Dun dun dun.
See you next time. United by differences, everyone.
United by differences. All right, take care. Bye bye.
Bye.
Ending broadcast.